Greetings, students. I'm Dr. Sadri, your instructor for this course. And today what we are going to do is we are going to cover chapter 21. And chapter 21, as you know, has a title that you've seen it before. Is that right? International Political Economy. From now on, I'm going to use basically the abbreviation for that, and that's what this subfield of international relation is all about. It's called IPE, stand for International Political Economy, and the chapter is doing a great job. It covers quite a bit of information, and the interesting part of it is when you look at this chapter as opposed to the regional one that we have covered before. Regionalism, in a way, deals with also international political economy issues, but it deals with it at a regional level. This one focuses on, it's just called international political economy, but I think the better term for it would have been maybe the global dimension or global level of international political economy. Because when you say international, anything beyond the border of one country is international. Is that right? So, and if you remember on one of the first lectures I've mentioned that when we say something international has three levels. It could be between two states. It's an international because it crosses, national boundary. It could be between more than two states in the same region, then it's regional. Or it could go beyond one region, we call it global. So in this regard, I think the author could have changed the title a little bit to make it a little bit easier for students to understand. But, here we go. I complement some of the material in your text and, your other readings. So it covers the history of IPE. It also talks about the approaches to IPE, and it talks about the development of IPE, and that's very important. All right. So what could we say about IPE? Well, first let's start with the definition. That's always what we do. We say that it's important, and then right after that and why is it important? It's important because it affects our life in very, very real way. Okay? It's not abstract, it actually touches our life. So IPE is the study of how politics and economics interact at a global level. See? Your text talks about global level, but they should have mentioned that one. So their assumption is IPE is only at the global level, but they actually from what we discussed in the regional one, it happens over there too, but at the particular geographic region. Now, it's also known as IPE is known as basically a subfield of IR. Okay, and it basically grew in 1970s. Two of the very famous people in that regard, as in terms of Americans, are Robert Cohen and Joseph Nye. And then there was also a British scholar by the name of Susan Strange. So the three of them are very, very important. So if I give you a question about name the three top, IPE scholars. Here we go. Sometimes students, they send me emails. They say, Dr. Sadi, how come we do not have a study guide? I am your study guide. If you pay attention to what I say in these videos and also on those, PowerPoints that I organized for you, all those chapter summaries, this and that, that is, study guide is for high school kids. Is that right? I trust you guys more than anything else. And I know you're all professional and you can follow that. So here we go. When did it come about? We mentioned it came about in the 1970s. We mentioned the three people. Now, why did it come about? What was going on in 1970s? If you ask your parents, they're going to say, what? 1970s, one of the major crises was the OPEC oil crisis. So these economic issues affecting political issues were some of the major motivation behind people coming up with what? The notion of IPE. Okay, so having said that, now let's go and talk a little bit about the historical dimension of it. So the age of mercantilism was from 16 all the way to 18th century. In that regard, we can say it's an era of capitalism and, that led into what? Establishment of mercantilism. Mercantilism are basically like an economic realist. You see what I mean? For all practical purposes. I'm just making it as I go to, because I know that most of you know what realism is all about. In that regard, government has tremendous amount of power. Is that right? Power of what? Power to manage the economy. Because from the perspective of a mercantilist, the relation between a state and other state is like a zero-sum game. If we gain, they lose. And we don't want to lose because then they're going to gain. You see what I mean? So it's what we call also zero-sum game. All right. So in that regard, there was tremendous amount of competition among states that they did that. We usually see that one all over Europe, and Europe's history is constantly, provides us with a lot of wonderful example in that regard. They were trying to uh, dominate the rest of the world. Is that right? Dominance of the overseas countries, and they were particularly focused on precious metals, gold and silver. I mean, look at what the Spaniards and Portuguese did with Latin America. Why did they go over there? Okay? And they went over there because they were after gold and silver. They would fill out their ships full of gold and silver and then bring it to what? Bring it to their own empires in Europe. And so that's something that I want you to remember about that. Of course, the chapter goes into a lot more details. I just highlight some of the main points so you remember. Now, what about, the next perspective? And the next perspective is the age of liberalism, which started from 19th century and continued all the way to what, 20th century. So in that regard, we can say that liberals, they started their ideas in 19th century, but they started developing, concepts such as free trade. Free trade is much more important than protectionism because protectionism was the job of mercantilists. Mercantilists trying to defend their domestic economy if they couldn't compete in terms of producing a product which is high quality and low cost, what would they do? They would artificially increase the price of competing products by adding tariffs. Tariff is basically a tax on imports, okay? It's the favorite thing for what? Mercantilists. They like to do that, all right? Free traders, they said, no, that's not going to work. You do that one, you artificially try to help, but you need to let the natural forces, they take charge. So they're very much for what? Reducing the tariffs. And then, unfortunately, from the perspective of the liberals, when the major economic situation happened, which was the Great Depression in 1930s, many of the liberal ideas in terms of, oh, free this, free that, this and that, guess what? The free trade, I meant, of course, not free products. There's no free lunches, is that right? They all went to retreat because the mercantilists, basically, they were establishing protectionist policies to defend their own country. Okay, liberal international economy from the period of 1945, basically post-Cold War. I mean, post-World War II, I'm sorry, all the way to what? To Cold War. In that regard, we can say the liberal ideas were greatly, practiced, especially after the end of the, Second World War. So in fact, in 1944, which was even a year almost before the end of the war, there was the Bretton Woods conference. This was basically sponsored by the US and the UK, and the whole ideas right there was establishing a system that after the war finishes and everybody's trying to rebuilding the world in a way that cooperation leads into peace. Okay, so what did they do? They did three major things. Number one, they established something called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. This is known as GATT, G-A-T-T, okay? This promotes the free trade and reduces the protectionist measures by the state. Second thing they did, establishing IMF, International Monetary Fund. Is that right? IMF. So it aims to monetary, to do monetary cooperation and international trade through what? Stabilization of financial, resources. And then, last but certainly not least, World Bank or IBRD. Remember we talked about this one before? IBRD, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Well, IBRD lends money to promote what? Economic development. Now, let's say a few words about IMF because that's one of the topics that your chapter is focusing on. The headquarters of it is in the US. It has about 190 members, is that right? And the supporters of it, as we mentioned, we mentioned that it's trying to help economies that are in a crisis. Of course, it doesn't give long-term loans. It gives short-term loans to make sure that everybody's doing okay, is that right? So nobody's rocking the boat, What's the boat? The boat is the world economy, is that right? So the support of it, they said that IMF is necessary for global economic stability. So the key word right here is stability, because by doing that one, they're more stable. And then unequal power of the rich, in IMF, because the richer you are, the more voting power you have, is justified because they contribute more. All right. The critics, they say, three major criticisms. One, richer states are basically in a position to dominate. That's one number one. Two, their loans are unfair. Three, the structure adjustment program that IMF suggests are usually pretty harsh. Okay, so having said that one, what do they say about the post-Cold War era from 1990 all the way to present? There was basically collapse of communism, which basically suggests, oh wow, so it's the victory day for capitalism. Is that right? And then in that regard, we have new and millions of new group about consumers coming on into the global market because they're escaping from what? The post-communist systems have failed. So in that regard, we can say how many post-communist states experienced severe hardship during this period. Why? Because they're changing from a command economy when the government decides how much to produce, how much to consume, how much to you price it. You see what I mean? All the way to leaving it to the market. So market decide. Something is popular, the price goes up. Something is not popular, the price goes down. I mean, we are used to it. See, as Americans, we take it for granted. But if you were coming from any of the Eastern European countries or Soviet Union, for God's sake, you're not familiar with that. All right? So, next one. Post-Cold War era, again, continuing with, what are some of the other things happening during this period of time? During this period of time, you should remember that also there was massive acceleration of globalization. Your authors, they love globalization, so they have included in everything, and this is one of the things they emphasize. And in fact, they talk about the whole idea that international trade started growing like crazy. All right, from 1990 to 2021. In 1990, the total amount was like about 3.5 trillion. By 2001, it increased 8 times to 28.5 trillion, dollars. It's amazing. Is that right? Now, what has contributed to this? One of the other things that has contributed to this is technological development, technological revolution, in terms of especially digital communication. Look, we all have, some cell phones here and there, laptops, this, that, iPod, iPhone, iDis, iDat, and these technologies are shrinking the world. So it allows that globalization process to grow faster. Efforts to further, liberal international economy order has expanded more, and that led to actually establishment of the very first organization that has been trying to promote what and bring a sense of order to trade, World Trade Organization, established in 1995. Okay, let's say a few words about WTO, or World Trade Organization. The headquarters of it is not in the U.S., it's in Geneva. How many members? 164, based on, the information that your book is talking about. And then, of course, as always, it has a what? Now, what is its job? Its job is to basically reduce the trade barriers and try to allow some of the disputes about the trade resolve in a peaceful fashion. It actually has a dispute settlement organization inside, okay? That's not bad. There are supporters of it. There are what? Critics of it. Let's talk about the supporters first. It says that the supporters, they said that all benefit of these are long-term. It provides with a free trade. It provides the student, it provides the states with what? Equal, opportunities. And there is no weighted, voting system like IMF. IMF, do you remember? The richer you are because you have more vote. In this one, everybody is equal. So these are all advantage. What about the critics? The critics says that richer states benefit more from the free trade, and the poorer states are exploited. Okay, those are their argument. And they say that the global elite, they set up the rules in such a way that they benefit more. Okay. What about the post-Cold War era, continuation of this one? What else can we say? We can say that as the time went on in the post-Cold War era, we see that this phenomenon of growing resistance to actually the march of liberalism and free trades and everything and globalization. In fact, there was a lot of ideas against anti-globalization. Groups, younger people and some other people are growing against these things. Not all of the younger people, is that right? But there were people who were very intellectual. Some people, they say, oh, these were the hippies of 1960s and is the new version of them or something. Bottom line, the idea right here is this, that there were trends in global political economic balance that is changing, and there are so-called the new emerging economies, or what your book calls EMEs. Is that right? Emerging market, economies. What are some of these countries? China, India, Brazil. They grew very fast. Mexico grew very fast. Okay, so in that regard, we can particularly say something about China. China, that used to be considered to be a basket case and the land of this very, very proud group of people, was divided among a lot of different colonial powers and everything else, and nobody thought China would ever come back. Right now, it's the second largest economy in the world, and by 2023, by not 2023, by 2030, China has a very good chance to be the largest single market in the world. All right. So how does that one come about? How does all the success is coming about? All right. If everything is so negative and bad. All right. So mercantilism, they emphasize the notion of self-sufficiency. You need to rely on yourself. And the ultra version of it, which is considered autarky, is a self-sufficiency to the power of 10. Okay? And this refers usually to ultra-nationalists. They do not want to deal with anybody. They think, oh, any kind of foreign influence is bad, negative, blah, blah, blah. You see them here and there. You see them in our own country too, right? I don't want to mention any names. I leave it to your imagination. Okay. So economists here, they're talking about, well, what about competition? Competition is important, but they say no cooperative activities usually happens in this and that. So they are not very much into those things. And as long as in a competition they win, they're happy. They don't win, they're bad losers. You see what I mean? So government in that regard, they think they should be, from their perspective, they should be very, very active and, to command the economy and help and generate wealth. Well, if you think about it, in the history of U.S., which your chapter didn't talk about, we have switched back and forth between protectionist policies and what? Free policies, liberalism policies. Okay, so what about the major approaches to IPE? Well, one of these major approaches is liberalism, as we talked about. This approach is associated with Adam Smith and David Ricardo. Okay, your text goes to all the benefits. These people, they basically believe that free trade provides a lot of good things for the community as a whole. All right, this was their true belief. It wasn't like they were rich people and they were benefiting from it. That was the way they were thinking about it. Now, of course, they thought that there's also there are other people, they mentioned that one, not Adam Smith and David Ricardo, that there are advantages beyond just economic part, and that part is political. They call it the capitalist peace theory, because they think that when the countries, they start economically developing, cooperating with one another, blah blah blah, they're not going to fight. If they're benefiting from each other's, trade, who is willing to, rock the boat? Nobody wants to rock the boat. They want to maintain that benefit, even if the benefit doesn't go to every single person. So then they avoid war. So that would be another word to do that. So here we go. The whole notion is free trade works better there is minimum interference from the government. Now, another major theory of IPE, as we mentioned, is what? Marxism. Well, as you know, Marx basically focused on he didn't really come up with some alternative ideas of, okay, how are we going to be doing that? He basically just criticized capitalism. Is that right? Very, very famous critic of capitalism. Of course, it's important to know what are the shortcomings of every. So in that regard, he contributed something, but he didn't come up with the same ideas that, like, for example, Soviet Union and China, they came about as the first two, Marxist countries or something. Is that right? They made it as they went, Here the notion was that there is still class struggle between rich and poor. There is exploitation. These are what Marxist terminology. But Marx mostly focused on domestic aspect. He didn't have an international perspective. He gave lip service to, laborers of the world, unite. Is that right? So nationalism doesn't matter. But in reality, we see a lot of people, they feel more nationalistic. It was Lenin with his book about, imperialism and everything that really expanded Marxist perspective to the international level, saying the same way that in the domestic system there are rich and poor, in international economy, in the world, there are rich and poor countries. Okay. One of the probably newest version of these, Marxist or structuralist perspective is dependency. And dependency came out in the 1960s as basically a criticism of modernization theory. Modernization theory was assuming, look at Western Europe, look at North America. There was a time that they were underdeveloped. They worked, they this, they that, they got educated, they got, they started having, economic development, and eventually economic development led to political development. So these are the stages of the development. So one day you're primitive, eventually you become developed. Very interesting, but very simple idea. Okay. Well, dependency theory people, some of the ideas came up from Raúl Prebisch, a very famous, economist, Argentinian economist that worked with the United Nations. He said, wait a minute, slow down. This underdevelopment, is kind of persistent. And the reason it's persistent is because the structure of international trade is against weaker states. Is that right? Like, for example, if you look at, let's say, Colombia. Is that right? Well, Colombia's main, products that we usually are used to in the morning is coffee. Okay. Well, Colombia is not the only country in the world that produces coffee. There are a lot of other countries. So let's say Colombia in relationship to the United States. United States has the option of buying the coffee from Colombia or go and buy the coffee from Indonesia. Those Java coffees are very, very famous. Is that right? Or, we also have our own coffee, in Hawaii. We produce it, or buy it from Kenya, or buy it from other countries, tropical countries that they can produce high quality coffee. You see? So in that regard, Colombian, economy is more dependent on the U.S. than U.S. economy is dependent on Colombia. You see, because we have options, they don't have as much. That's the main thing they have. So that's why the dependency theories, they talk about core state as opposed to periphery state, and periphery states, they get what? Exploited. All right. Now, one of the other theories that IPE is talking about is hegemonic stability. And hegemonic stability theory is very simple. It's basically a powerful state, one big powerful state that provides some public goods to their own international community. What are these public goods? Security. It provides security. So the, oceans of the world, which are basically like the highways of the world. And, what's the cheapest way of sending something from one place to another? Not by plane, it's by ship. Is that right? That's why we have all these container ships. Why things are getting cheaper? Because the services are getting better, they're becoming more efficient, etc., etc. So they, produce the product in where labor is cheap. Labor is usually cheap in China, India, Indonesia, a lot of Asian countries, right? Okay, we'll produce it over there, put it on the container, ship it to what? Big markets. So even, for example, when you see products that they have Western label on it, like IKEA. Think about IKEA. Is that right? IKEA, we know it as a product that comes from Sweden, but it used to 100% come from Sweden. Now, a lot of the designers are Swedes. Okay. Sometimes IKEA even hires other designers from other countries to design some stuff. Where do they usually build it? Why is it so inexpensive? It's because they use cheap labor. The cheap labor from Asia and other places. Then they put it in, so they have a winning, formula of putting that one in form of boxes with an instruction and everything. You go ahead and do what? You go ahead and buy it and you enjoy it. All right. So they say that in that regard, hegemonic stability provides those, goods in terms of what? In terms of security, in terms of allowing these things to happen, a currency that usually is very used and is to promote trade. So IKEA can use it, oil companies can use it, food companies can use it, everybody else can use it. Now, of course, there are supporters of this argument. The supporters, they say, the reason in 1930s there was Great Depression and then led eventually to unhappiness of a lot of people and then World War II was because there was no hegemonic, power in the world. There was no hegemonic, so hegemonic stability wasn't working. The people who are against it, they usually say, this is basically a justification for great power's domination of everybody else, okay? And in that regard, the best thing is, instead of allowing one power to do this, we have to do multilateral decision-making or cooperation. Last but not least, ideas that has come about in the last few years is the idea of the open economy politics. Is that right? And this idea has come about in 1990s. All right, and it basically it focuses on how states adopt economic policies that they do. And how does that one happen? They identify three major players. One of these are they call actors, and these can be asking who benefits and losing, and their losses from what policies. 2, domestic institution of the government, how they mediate between what different interests. And last but not least, international bargaining, which is as a result of negotiation among different states. In that regard, also, like any other ideas, look, there is no perfect idea. All right. And there are also, supporters and there are critics. What are the supporters they're saying? Supporters, they say that the advantage of this, approach is that it provides a clear base for conducting research. Okay, all right. But the critics, they say that it oversimplifies everything. By oversimplifying doesn't mean that necessarily you have a better understanding. It means that you have a, more or less understanding. Is that right? So you don't get to the deep aspect. So these are some of the things that I wanted to mention. I actually left another point from my PowerPoints for you that I'm not mentioning now. Do you know why? Because I want you to go and use my PowerPoint. So I'm hoping that when you're watching my lectures, you have the PowerPoint open, and then what? Here and there on the PowerPoint, your own copy, you add some notes based on the lecture. All right, as usual, I'm available always by an email if you have any kind of problem. It has been great, talking with you. Take care. Bye.